8:17 is your time. Next week, we could be heading toward another government shutdown if Congress does not reach a funding deal by Tuesday night. On top of that, the Trump administration is threatening to fire thousands of federal workers, which would have a significant impact on people across the DMV. Joining us now is Congressman James Walkinshaw from Virginia's 11th Congressional District. Good morning, Congressman. Good to have you with me.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Look, I just wanted to start out the gate. I wanted to level with you, right? People at home don't care about political talking points. They care about whether they can pay their mortgage, whether they can buy groceries. And so what specifically are you doing to stop a shutdown from happening?
So I am urging a bipartisan agreement, and I think what people here in the 11th district and across the country want to see is Democrats and Republicans putting aside the politics and coming together to negotiate a spending agreement that meets the needs of the American people in terms of canceling the devastating healthcare cuts that are looming and keeps the federal government open and functioning. So I want to see a bipartisan negotiation to do that.
I hear your sentiment on that. Senate Majority Leader John Thune calling the Democrats' requests, quote, completely unhinged, unreasonable, and unserious. Where do we go from here? We know, the Republicans wouldn't even come to the table for a meeting. And so where do you even begin to negotiate on this?
Well, you're right. It is hard to negotiate when one side, President Trump and the Republicans, refuse to even sit down at the same table and talk about the differences that we have and try to bridge the gap. I'll be in Washington at the Capitol on Monday. I know that most Democrats will be there as well. We're ready to roll up our sleeves and go to work and negotiate a bipartisan agreement. And, I still remain hopeful that that will happen.
What does that mean? For example, so if you're going to go negotiate, what is the single biggest concession that you would consider to avoid a shutdown in Virginia?
Well, Democrats have put forward a proposal in both the House and Senate that would fund the government, keep it open, extend the Affordable Care Act premium tax credits that help working and middle class families afford health care, cancel the $1 trillion in Medicare cuts, provide some protections for federal workers against what the Trump administration has been doing in terms of refusing to implement programs that Congress has funded and appropriated. So we've laid out our proposal. And I'm certainly willing to sit down and negotiate. And in a negotiation, you have to make compromises to get to an agreement. But one side, the Republicans, are just not willing to do that.
So to your point, I hear what you're saying. But if all of those things that you've outlined are non-starters already, with Senate Majority Leader John Thune calling them exactly that, non-starters, I mean, how can you pivot? When you go to these negotiations, which will be quite high stakes by Monday, are you ready to offer some different concessions? Where do you go from there?
Well, it's hard to answer that question because Senator Thune and President Trump and Speaker Johnson have refused to even sit down. But the way a negotiation works is you sit down and both sides lay out their proposals. You try to understand where the other side is coming from. You try to find some common ground so that you can move forward. But right now, one side, the Republicans, are absolutely refusing to do that.
Well, I wanted to push you on that because, yes, Republicans, control the agenda. They control government essentially at this point, but Democrats still have a lot of leverage, especially in the Senate. Why haven't we seen a more aggressive strategy from your party to force some kind of resolution here? What would you tell people who are watching that are quite worried about how you all are trying to move the pieces here?
Well, I'd say we have had an aggressive strategy to try to force a resolution. As you know, there was a meeting scheduled at the White House for yesterday where President Trump agreed to meet with Democratic leaders after Democratic leaders demanded that meeting. President Trump backed out of that meeting at the last minute. So Democrats have been working aggressively to try to get President Trump and Republicans to the table to hammer out a bipartisan agreement. And they've been running away and refusing to meet. Speaker Johnson canceled planned votes in the House and sent Republican members of Congress home. They're not even making an effort to negotiate.
So specific to Virginia, as you know, federal workers are facing, a very real threat of not just furloughs, but potentially permanent job loss. What would you say directly to your constituents about the efforts you're taking? I mean, again, what comfort can you offer? What else can you say to people watching this interview?
Well, the comfort I can offer, first we have to acknowledge, and you know this, for 9 months now, federal workers have been under assault and under siege by the Trump administration. Thousands have been fired and pushed out. The memo that came out recently from Russ Vought was bluster from my perspective. It is important to know that the Trump administration has no more legal authority to fire or lay off federal workers during a shutdown than they do when the government is
So
open.
you're calling their
Federal
bluff.
workers have
Am I hearing respectfully?
civil service protect. Can I finish? They have
Yes,
civil service protections in a shutdown, and the administration has to follow the same RIF procedures during a shutdown as they do when the government is
sure.
open.
I hear you. I understand all of that. But I mean, essentially you're saying, hey, this isn't going to hold any legal merit, correct?
That's correct.
Is that cold comfort to someone watching this going, hey, it sure looks like the government's going to shut down. I'm scared. I could permanently lose my job. And telling them at home, hey, listen, that could be the case, but legally, in a few months, we could potentially help you. I mean, what do we do with that?
What I'm saying is, if the Trump administration attempts to conduct mass layoffs during a government shutdown, they will have violated the law. They'll end up in court, and I believe they will lose in court. And they've lost several of those cases related to RIF processes already. So, do I think the Trump administration will try to fire more federal workers during a shutdown? Unfortunately, yes. Do I think the Trump administration will try to fire more federal workers if the government remains open? Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, final word before we have to let you go. Do you think that this shutdown will happen? What's your sense of it at this moment?
I think unless President Trump changes his approach and agrees to meet this weekend, and I hope he will do that, I think we're headed toward a shutdown early next week. My hope is President Trump will agree to meet over the weekend with Democratic leaders. They can hash out an agreement and a compromise, and we could vote on it early next week. But to date, President Trump refuses to meet.
All right, Virginia Congressman James Walkinshaw, certainly appreciate the conversation today. Thank you.